Hola digital world, and welcome back to yet another episode of Spliced In Later, coming to you on a Wednesday. Time for another movie review. And for my regular listeners, if you're thinking, wait a minute, you promised us a regular episode on Tuesday, and it came around and we waited anxiously for that episode to appear, and it did not happen. Where's the episode, Jordan? I say, why are you lying? No one did that. No, but in all honesty, I absolutely just forgot. I was sitting around at home, wrapping up the day, getting ready to go to sleep, and I went, oh, damn, today's Tuesday. I did not do that episode I said I would do. Oh, well. So, apologies for that. I will be doing next week. We will talk about Indiana Jones, like I said I would. But for now, luckily, we can give you an episode this week anyway, because a new movie has been released that I've been very excited to watch and now be able to review for you. It is the latest entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the 29th film to come out, I think. Let me quickly go over it in my head. Yep, 29. I got it right. Hooray. The 29th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thor, Love and Thunder. Continuing our most popular and regular series here on Spliced In Later, where we just basically talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole, because it is specifically my favorite franchise, my favorite thing in the movie world. It's just the thing that I enjoy the most, as we've gone over extensively. It's mainly due to just the impressiveness of building this incredible interconnected world with all these different movies and all these different characters that are able to stand on their own 2 feet in their own separate installments, and then weave in and out for team up movies or cameos or anything like that, that all work in substance to the films. So you can watch any film or now any TV show in this series, and even if you're a newcomer, you still will be able to get what's going on. And what keeps it fresh, 29 films in and who knows how many TV shows now, is the varying themes and feels and of the different films. Whether a Winter Soldier is a political thriller, Guardians of the Galaxy is a space comedy, Thor Ragnarok is just a straight up comedy, Black Panther is a cultural kingdom story, Ant-Man is a heist film, all Spider-Man coming of age, all the different types. It's great. For our regular series, we have either been going back to the past and going through all the old installments of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We've gone back to Iron Man and started from there. And we're even including the TV shows that are now considered non-canon for the MCU, like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., because for me personally, they still are. And I don't care what anyone else says about that. Or, probably more frequently, we talk about the new shit that is just constantly coming. It's been firing on all steam once the pandemic list ended. From 2021, we've had constant TV shows on Disney Plus and plentiful movies being dropped in the cinemas. This isn't even the last MCU film for the year. I believe Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever, is coming out in November. So, today we are talking about Thor, Love and Thunder, the 4th film in the Thor franchise, starring Chris Hemsworth as Thor, and the 2nd film to be directed by Taika Waititi after he directed Thor Ragnarok. A film that basically changed Thor, or changed the vibe and feel of a Thor film, away from the mythical Asgardian, old-timey Shakespearean tone that Kenneth Branagh set up in the original Thor and continued on to the second one, and sort of changed it, focused more on Chris Hemsworth's comedic timing and the silliness of Thor as a character, combined with Taika Waititi's very, very, very unique and specific style of humor, throwing in a lot of incredible visuals and allusions to rock songs that complement whatever's going on in the movie. Ragnarok was a huge success. After the first Thor films were relatively okay, critically received in that sense of the word, Ragnarok just struck the right tone for everybody who watched it. It revitalized the character of Thor and the characters in the Thor franchise to a point where it was only a matter of time before Kevin Feige and Disney and Marvel went back to Taika Waititi and said, do it again. Do it again. We like money. Do it again. So he's done it again. This is the first of the Marvel characters to get a fourth film. We may even get a fifth one after this. If everybody is digging Thor and Taika Waititi's feel, either he will show up in another movie or it will be bouncing around in the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie or an eventual team-up movie. Case in point, he is not retired like Iron Man and Captain America are. It seems like Chris Hemsworth's Thor, now it's got its second life, its second breath. Even though he's been around for a while, they feel like they've still got a lot to do with him. Now, so this is a review for this later stuff. I don't talk about the things that went into making the film or the history of the film like I do the older stuff, because I only saw it a couple hours ago. I have no idea what its effect is going to be. And this is just my knee-jerk reaction to the film. If you don't know what the film's about, if you have avoided any trailers, great. I will do what I normally do on here for this later stuff. I don't talk about spoilers. I don't spoil anything in the movie. I keep my summaries as vague as possible. Basically, what this film is about is our good friend Thor, who has, after the events of Avengers Endgame, he's gone off with the Guardians of the Galaxy and he's gotten himself into shape and all of that stuff. But he is still lost. He's lost a lot. He's been through a lot of tragedies. He's suffering a crisis of his identity, his purpose in life, what he actually wants to do with himself. Meanwhile, on the other plate, on the other side of the world, you've got Natalie Portman returning as Jane Foster, Thor's love interest from the first two Thor films, who was dropped once they realized it wasn't really working, I suppose. Anyway, she's back now. She's going through her own real terrible shit that's happening to her in this film. And in a way to prevent what's happening to her, to avoid it, she ends up somehow wielding the power of Thor. The magical hammer Mjolnir, which was shattered in Ragnarok, is brought to her, reassembled, and when she has the hammer, she has the look, the power of Thor. The two of them eventually collide when they are brought to this point by our villain of the film, Gorr, the God Butcher, played by Christian Bale. Gorr is a very unique, tragic sort of villain who has lost a lot. He's suffered ultimate tragedy, and he blames the fact that his god and gods in general did not intervene on his behalf and save him and prevent the death and all this stuff that's gone on around him, despite the fact that they've demanded worship and been attended to for all these years. Gorr gets a hold of a special power which gives him the ability to go around and hunt down and kill all these gods. And of course, on the top of his list are Asgardians. Obviously, Asgardians are seen as gods by the people of Earth. They've got the powers of gods. They run around with all the other gods going on. So basically, Thor is in Gorr's line of sight. Gorr does some villainous things, hoodwinks a few people, takes things that don't belong to him, keeping it vague as possible. So Thor and Jane have to team up and go and take Gorr down, supported by Thor's buddy Valkyrie from Thor Ragnarok, the now king of Asgard, and his goofy rock buddy Korg, who's also along for the ride. The Guardians of the Galaxy are also in here very briefly. If you're going to this film expecting it's going to be an Asgardians of the Galaxy type movie, you will be disappointed. So I'll warn you in advance that they're in it in a basic cameo sense. They are there to set Thor up into a certain point, and then they swiftly exit from the film. There are plenty of other cameos and references and things in here though, so if you're that person that goes to MCU films because you just want to see them reference things, you'll get a lot out of it too. Now, my opinion of the movie is it was good. I enjoyed it. It wasn't great. I think of the two MCU films that have come out this year, being this and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, I like Doctor Strange quite a bit more than I like this one. I felt the first half of it was a complete mess. It took a real long time for things to get going and get to a point where I was on board with the film. And then somewhere in the halfway point, once certain things had been pushed aside, it suddenly really hooked my interest and it got really good. And I really liked what I was seeing. And I thought the ending was quite awesome too. And I was really a big fan of that. There were parts that I really, really liked, parts that just didn't work for me. So we're going to get into that. First off, positives. Chris Hemsworth as Thor, great. As I said, he's found a new lease of life ever since they discovered that Thor is better when he's funny. I do worry a little bit that they are pushing the humor a bit too far and making him an idiot or a dumbass. They didn't push it to that point where it took me out of the movie, but I thought a lot of what Thor did in this film, in terms of comedy-wise, was very dopey and silly and dumb. But it still worked. Chris Hemsworth obviously has a lot of fun as Thor. He is Thor. I mean, you look at him, it's hard to picture anyone else in the role. And he brings a lot of heart and emotion to the character as well. Even when he's being silly, even when he's sitting in a situation where you've got screaming goats next to him and a big rock monster next to him as well, he still manages to sell the seriousness of the situation when he needs to. And he's able to have really good chemistry and react off whoever's around him, whether it's Natalie Portman or Tessa Thompson or Christian Bale, or even his bloody axe Stormbreaker and his hammer Mjolnir. He has a few emotional scenes with those things, these inanimate objects, and he manages to sell it. What really works as well is his chemistry with Natalie Portman as Jane Foster. Now, going back and watching the old Thor films, it didn't worry me that much, but I can see where the chemistry in those older films wasn't necessarily actually brought to screen. It was that old case of older Marvel movies where love interests were put in films because that seemed to be the order of the day. Spider-Man and Mary Jane, Tony and Pepper, Thor and Jane, Steve and Peggy, Reed Richards and Sue Storm, Daredevil and Elektra. You go back through all the old Marvel films and it was always you had your hero, and then you had right next to him the love interest, someone that falls in love and has a romance with them along the way. For those older films, it was more told, not shown, where we were told that they had fallen in love and they adored each other. The chemistry is there to a little degree, but it's a lot of just, we love each other now. Okay, cool. See you later. And obviously it wasn't working for Natalie Portman either. I don't know the official story. I believe she wasn't satisfied with the Jane Foster role, and they were running out of what actually to do with her character apart from just pine after Thor. So they just sort of dropped it and left it alone. And obviously it worked out for Ragnarok when Thor just went off and did his own thing. But for this one, the story that pulls Jane back into the conflict and gives her the power of Thor is a very emotional and engaging story, which I know is pulled from the comics, but it's interesting to see it on screen, and they twist it up a bit so it's not a complete copy. It's really great seeing her as a superhero. I think she does it really well. And somehow the chemistry between her and Chris Hemsworth actually shows in this movie. The love that they feel for each other, the tried relationship that didn't work out, them falling back in love in this film, it really works. They sell it. Obviously, this movie has to do a lot of heavy lifting, I think, to sell you on the idea that they really did have this relationship and this chemistry, but it works out, which is pretty great. All the scenes that worked really well in this movie were them talking or arguing or doing the lovey-dovey stuff or fighting side by side. It was perfect stuff, and I thought it was really good and it worked really well, which is the whole point and selling point of this movie, is the Jane Foster as the mighty force. So it's important that worked, and it did. Christian Bale as our villain Gore, really good stuff. He will go down as one of the better villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in a notorious world where a lot of villains are underdeveloped. Gore has a very intriguing origin story. I do feel like it's not elaborated on as much as I would like. I was watching some interviews with Christian Bale. He says a lot of stuff was actually cut out of the movie. This is actually one of the shorter MCU movies that you will see. It's under 2 hours. Not by a lot, but it is under 2 hours. And I feel like a lot of character development and growth as who he is as a person once he becomes the villain was kept to the wayside. But maybe that's to the advantage of the movie, because he's in it sparingly, but his presence is always felt. He has this really creepy power involving shadows, meaning the way he just appears in a scene where he just suddenly fades into existence, whether you just see his eyes first or his horrible, disgusting teeth, is creepy, and it's unsettling. Christian Bale obviously loses himself in the role, as he does with a lot of other things he does. The way his mannerisms, his grief, his attempts to be nice to children. I don't know, in the movie, I don't know if it comes across whether he's tormenting them or he's actually trying to cheer them up or whatever, but it's very unsettling, and it's fun to watch him. You appreciate Christian Bale as an actor seeing him in the Gore role in here. I wish we'd seen more of him, but for the most part, they promise when you see Christian Bale is hired to play a particular role or a character, you expect a lot, you expect 110% effort, and you do get a lot out of it. I really liked Gore. I thought he was great, developed for what we got, and I appreciate where his story ended up in the movie as well. Also, positives. What else is there? Visuals look great. For a movie where a lot of it is shot in front of green screens, obviously, it still looks really good. A lot of the imagery, especially the juxtaposition between the lights and magic and wonder of all the gods' worlds, contrasted against the realm that Gore comes from, the land of shadow and darkness, really shows that highlights between what you can do with visuals and with CG when it's done strategically and effectively to the movie's advantage. The battle on Gore's home world, where everything goes to black and white and the shadows are sort of coming out of the screen but also unfurling around the characters, looked really cool. I really enjoyed and digged that, and was also creeped out by it, which worked really well for it too. The fights, I mean, again, with CG, it might look a bit silly. It didn't to me. When Thor brings Stormbreaker down on Gore's necromancer sword, it looks great. The fight scenes with Jane Foster and Valkyrie, great stuff too. Valkyrie is also a good character in here too. I think she's underutilized. I don't know if it's because Valkyrie was kind of introduced as maybe the potential Thor and love interest for Ragnarok, and with Jane Foster back now, she doesn't have that much to do except to tag along on the journey. It's good that she's there. She has a great camaraderie with Jane Foster, and she's got a great attitude and toughness, kick-assery, if you will, that I really appreciate. But a lot of the times I do feel like she was just sort of there in the scene because she is contracted to be in the movie. Maybe she could have had a few more moments to shine. I'm not sure. She's essentially, towards the end of the movie, she just step aside so it can be Thor's movie. But to me, it just sort of felt like, oh, I don't need to be in this movie anymore. Okay, see you for the final montage at the end of the movie. What didn't work for me, unfortunately, is the comedy. So I really like Thor Ragnarok, and I think it's a really good balance of Taika Waititi's humor and the actual severity of the situation. So I was anticipating that in this movie, but unfortunately, the trap that this movie falls into, which happens with a lot of successful comedies that get sequels, is when the movies return to things that made everybody laugh. Instead of coming up with brand new ways to make people laugh, they just sort of do the same stuff again, but they make them longer and bigger. For example, there's a really funny scene in Thor Ragnarok involving Asgardian actors and seeing actual real-life actors playing the roles, pretending to play actors who play the roles of Thor and Loki and Odin respectively. All of them are back to basically do the same thing again in this movie, but it's a longer scene and it's bigger and it's going for more and more silliness and more laugh, and those characters even come back to throw in another punchline later in the movie. It did make me laugh, unfortunately, because I felt like I'd already seen it, and I already laughed at it once, and there was nothing here that was being added that made me laugh some more. And that's the thing with this one. This one tries really, really hard to be silly and funny every single scene, which doesn't work when you've got a creepy, messed up character like Gore menacing the heroes. I noticed this because whenever Christian Bale was on screen, everything wasn't funny anymore. It was upsetting and disturbing, and that was really intriguing. But every other scene, Thor hanging out with the Guardians, Thor going to see Zeus and all the other gods in this movie, Thor planning, Thor talking, it was constant gag and joke and side gag and side joke and all this different stuff, which unfortunately, if the jokes aren't landing, you notice them more because it's like, oh, I feel like I was supposed to laugh at that and I didn't. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I am being too harsh. I am not sure. I didn't have a very good movie experience for this. Limelight Cinemas, if you are listening, please fix your XD screens. Your sound in them is completely off. You've got the surround sound working for the action and the music, but the actual dialogue where the characters are speaking, that sound is coming from the front screen, and that's so low. I could barely hear what anybody was saying, and that's happened more than once in these movies. Aside from that, your exit sign's shining on the screen. Do something about that, because for the whole movie, all I could see was the shadow of the chairs in the front row displayed on the screen. Sorry, that's my little cranky old man complaint there. I'll move along from that. But yeah, so the humor was less clever and more silly. It's more, this made you laugh last time, gonna do it again, or this is funny because it's absurd. Sometimes maybe I might go, okay, I giggled a bit, but I don't think I laughed in the bits where I was supposed to laugh. For example, there's some screaming goats in here. I laughed when I didn't know there were goats screaming. The screams were just subtly off screen, and I didn't know what was making them. And it was like me laughing at Cabbage in Minions: The Rise of Gru. I just laughed because the screams were so absurd, and my brain was allowing me to imagine what they were coming from. But once they showed it was like, oh, goats, I was like, oh, okay, fine. But then they kept screaming. The goats would just scream over and over again in different scenes, and it wore off very fast. To sum it up perfectly, I think, of how the humor doesn't work for me is unfortunately the character of Korg, played by Taika Waititi. Korg was the breakout star of Thor Ragnarok, so naturally he's back in this movie. He has a bigger role. He's around more often. Sort of. Korg is in this movie a lot. There's not much purpose and point to him though, really. Korg worked great in Ragnarok because he was an unexpected comedy delight, but he was used in doses. Korg was Taika Waititi as a rock monster with his New Zealand brand type of humor, his way of observing things, the way he reacted to things. Korg would react, he would do a couple of things, and then he would rightfully move aside to allow the movie to go on. And then he would come back in points to allow the story to go along, but it was never, okay, Korg's here, brace yourself, he's going to say something funny. Korg complemented the movie in the way that his very small scene in Avengers Endgame also does. Korg can participate in fight scenes, sure, but as a background where he's not saying anything. Korg in here is constantly with Thor. It's never really explained why. I don't know if we're supposed to believe that Thor and Korg are like blood brothers, but Korg basically goes wherever Thor goes, which means he goes on the quest with him and Jane Foster and Valkyrie. And he's constantly saying silly things, which I know is designed to go, ha, Korg said that funny thing, and he said it in his funny voice. But none of it made me laugh. And there was a point where I wanted him to not be in the movie anymore because it just wasn't working for me. But, you know, Korg, obviously he was funny in Ragnarok, so he's constantly here. He's in every scene, doing his gags, saying things which aren't really working with what's going on in the movie. And that was really disappointing because Korg is one of my favorite MCU characters that's ever been done. And I really didn't care for him. I thought he sucked in this movie, unfortunately. That epitome, that Korg as a representation, I think, perfectly embodies my attitude to the comedy in the film. Unfortunately, because it's a comedy film, you can't really get around it. But everything else worked great. The romantic chemistry and romance story between Thor and Jane, and the mission of Gore and his presence as a villain really hammered that home as well too. The first part of the movie, complete mess. It really doesn't know where it wants to go or what tone it is. First Thor is with the Guardians, then he's with Sif, then he's back at Asgard, then he's with Zeus. There's a lot going on and none of it's really working for me. But once they move past Zeus and they go to Gore's black and white creepy land, the movie gets immediately 100 times better and had me hooked and invested in it towards the end. So that saved it for me from being a mediocre film to a pretty good film. Overall, Thor Love and Thunder gets a 7 out of 10 from me, which is a bit disappointing. I was expecting a lot more. It's a perfectly well-made film. It has a lot of really good moments, but it also has a lot of moments that just don't work for me, unfortunately. I don't know if that's me holding it to a higher bar because Ragnarok is so good. As with a lot of my reviews and a lot of things I see, I will have to reevaluate my position when I watch it again when it comes out on DVD and I add it to the collection. But for now, 7 out of 10 is perfectly fair, I think. I do highly recommend it. It's a great addition to the MCU. It's a great Thor story. It's obviously building on wherever they're going for Phase 4, wherever that is. But I do think that some restraint was needed in some areas, a bit more focus on the direction and tone of the movie. It could have been really great. That said, still really good and worth a watch, as I'm sure most of you will. The cinema was absolutely packed when I saw this one. Full of people that will not shut up when watching movies. Boy, oh boy, I can't wait for a movie screening when everyone's quiet. Haven't had that in a while. Be nice if we had that again just once, please. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. It's always fun talking about the MCU. There's a lot there to unpack. And I believe we'll be back in 2 weeks to jump in again when I review the Miss Marvel TV series as a whole. I'm really digging Miss Marvel. I think it could be the best Disney Plus MCU show by a long margin. I know I said that about Moon Knight, but it's even better than Moon Knight. So be sure to tune in when I talk about that. But next week is our normal episode where I will be talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark finally. I know I said I will have the last 3 weeks, but you have my word on that. Cross my heart and hope to die. We will be diving into that next week. So be sure to tune in for that. But until then, I love and appreciate you all. As always, thank you again for listening. It means a lot to me. And I will see you on the next Spliced In Later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.